Thank you, Christian, and thank you all the organizers for having me here. I'm really honored to have this keynote speech, and I like to show you a little bit some of the milestones and insights I had over the last decade or a little bit more of my research career on this topic. What I would like to address today is 4 questions or 3 questions. What are social emotional competencies and how can we measure them? Can we promote social emotional development through play? What is the role of the peer group for social emotional development? And at the end, I would like to give a short outlook in our new joint project. I would like to start this presentation with a little film. So, in this little sequence, you saw a lot of social emotional competences, what both girls showed here. What is obvious, you saw empathy, cooperation, comforting, being pro-social, but also emotion regulation. So the younger one, she did not cry, she stopped it. And also persistence, just to go along and keep on your goal, keep on track. And I mean, these 2 girls, they are less than they're 1 and 2 year olds. So we already see here, there is a lot of competences that children already have at this very young age. And why I am concerned with social emotional skills or competence, I use these 2 terms here interchangeably. So social emotional skills, we know from tons of research that it's highly relevant for life success. Because sometimes social emotional skills are also called like future skills, life skills, whatsoever. So we know it's relevant for academic achievement and later on for professional achievement. It's relevant for people's positive social relationships and also for well-being. So social emotional skills are one of the cores of a healthy and productive development of people. And when I started doing this research about social emotional competence, I started mostly with I was concerned with social competence, so this area of, and then the questions now emerge, okay, what is social competence? And some of you, maybe the older ones, might know this song. Good girls go to heaven, bad girls go everywhere. Because long ago, social competence, especially in childhood, was merely, okay, being pro-social, being cooperative, being nice, empathic. So, but it's only one dimension of social competence. And when I conducted a research on, it was about the association between social competence and depressive symptoms in kindergarten children, so 4 and 5-year-olds, there was one finding that really struck me. We found that children who show high pro-social behavior are at risk for depressive symptoms. And it was, no, we did something wrong with the coding. What happened? We checked the data 100 times, but it really remained there. It was a robust finding. And it really initiated in me to think, okay, what is social competence? And what we ended up with is really to say, okay, it's not only being pro-social, but it's also the other part. It's being assertive. And meanwhile, we define social competence as it's the ability to use social interactions to achieve one's own goals and needs, fulfill one's needs, while also considering the needs and aims of another person. So that social competence, so the fully developed social competence, is that to have a balance between fulfilling your own needs and considering the needs of others. And we make the distinction in all of our research between self-oriented social skills and other-oriented social skills. So self-oriented social skills are skills that are aimed to fulfill your own needs, your needs to belongingness, but also to reach your goals. It's sociability, assertiveness. And at the other end of the balance is other-oriented social skills, so pro-social cooperative skills. And for childhood, it's still the case that most research is concerned just with the pro-social cooperative part. But in our study, we have really shown that assertiveness is also very, very important for children's well-being at that young age. Because our finding with the pro-social behavior that we had, it turned out that it's the combination. So children who are high in pro-social behavior and low in assertiveness, those are the ones with a higher risk for depressive symptoms. So that's like the combination. What also turned out then, so some people say social competence, when you measure social competence, is having, okay, if you have positive peer relations, then you are socially competent. And we always say, no, that's not social competence, that's an outcome of social competence. And we then, my colleague and I, we developed this model that really serves us as a conceptual model how social competence and the adjustment, so the psychosocial adjustment goes together. So we say, okay, other and self-oriented social skills, they are important for well-being, health, but also for relationships, and that we also have these mental processes that are underlying the behavior, what you are showing. So this is a model that was very useful at then, but in the meantime, or in the last 10 years, I would say, this emotion part became very popular and very also in our research, because we have seen that what is more predictive than social competence for children's well-being and adjustment is the emotional competence. And you may also certainly know this when we talked about, okay, emotional intelligence is more important than cognitive intelligence and so on. So this term was very popular, and it also initiated a lot of research. So there is really a lot of research about emotional competence in children nowadays. Emotion regulation, but also emotion understanding. And I prefer the term emotional competence above emotional intelligence, because emotional intelligence is like static, but competence is dynamic. It grows, it can decrease, it can increase. So there is a process involved. And emotional competence, we say it includes mental processes, but also behavior. So it's understanding yours and others' emotions. That's one aspect. Showing empathy, as the little girl showed in our little film. And regulate your emotions. And especially the emotion regulation part turned out really to be one of the most stable and most robust predictor of any outcome in children's development. This seems really to be a core. competence. And we then started also to doing some research on emotion regulation. I will come back to that later. So until now I had said, okay, social competence and emotional competence, but what if we put it together? And we had this challenge 3 years ago when the learning progress studies, the Zürcher Lernverlaufserhebung, when the project leader came to us and said, okay, would you like to develop a concept to how can we assess social emotional competence in a longitudinal study that starts at age 4 and goes till the end of mandatory school? And we went then looking, okay, what are conceptual models, or what should be included if we want to have a holistic perspective on social emotional competence? And we ended up with the 5-factor model of social emotional skills. That's rather popular at the moment, because it relates nicely to the big 5 personality factors. So it's extroversion, agreeableness, neuroticism, conscientiousness, and openness. And somehow parallel is the skills level of the social emotional skills. So in the whole model, we can differentiate between interpersonal skills. Here, it's social engagement and collaboration. You see again this self and other-oriented, this distinction. But also the intrapersonal skills. Intrapersonal skills is something like emotion regulation, but also task performance. For example, persistence or self-control that you have. And a really new factor that we did new research on that, open-mindedness, and we chose like creativity as one of the factors that also complements this holistic perspective of social emotional skills. So the first challenge was to find a conceptual model. We did that, but then the next challenge was, okay, how can we measure social emotional competencies? And we said, okay, we don't want, and we couldn't, by the way, but we don't want to have questionnaires. Most of the research in children assessing social and emotional competence use questionnaires, parents or teacher reports. But that's just 1 or 2 perspectives. That's not the real behavior. And we said, we want to assess behavior. We want really to see, okay, what can children do? What is their performance? I mean, in every other field, we have performance-based measures, mathematics, language, motor development, physical activity, whatever. I mean, you have that what children show, and then you rate it, you evaluate it. And we said, okay, we want to have a measure like this. And we started with, okay, if we want to measure social and emotional competence, we have to measure it in groups. We really have to measure it, children interacting with each other, because we want to have the social relationships included. And we invented then a measure. It's the basis. It's the behavioral assessment of social emotional skills. It works like that. So we go to the kindergartens or later on in the schools, and children are randomly selected in up to 6 children at the same time. So it's like a group task. And they have several tasks they have to fulfill. So the first is they have to describe a picture. And there we look, okay, how do you stand? Are you self-conscious? And then children are given different pieces of a puzzle. So every child has has several pieces, but only together they can assemble the whole puzzle. So it's a collaborative task they have. And these 2 tasks are used to measure the interpersonal domain of social emotional competencies. And then children are given a box of Legos, and they are asked to create something. This we use then to assess children's creativity. And then they have to sort the Lego blocks back in a specific order. And this we use to assess their task performance, self-control, persistence. And then at the end, we have a task which is rather mean. It's a locked box. So you see in the box there is a present, there are stickers, and children are given several keys, and they have to try to open the box. But unfortunately, the researcher always forgets the right key. So it's a task, so children cannot open the chest. And at the end, they will be given the right key. So there's also the positive experience at the end. So this is like the task we give for the children, and we say, okay, that we put the children into challenges and then now show their competence, so their skill level, what they are seeing, what they are able to do when they are challenged. That's the idea behind. We then rate these behaviors. And because we have in our sample, we have 2,500 children, we you see we have a lot of data and a lot of work. We have said, okay, we need to have a coding manual that is time efficient, that's economic. And we then established a coding system that you have like in a like live coding, so you watch the behavior of the child, so it's all on video, and then you rate it. And you rate the behavior based on predefined markers. So we have, for each construct, we have 3 indicators and 3 markers, so 9 markers in total. And you use these markers to rate children's competence level. At the end, it's a scale from 1 to 7, but each marker you rate between low, middle, and high. So for assertiveness, indicator leadership skills, marker directing attention is something like, okay, high level of competence is the child leads the group purposefully through initiative, presence, and communication. Or, for example, for task performance, the indicator ability to concentrate, the marker accuracy. A high level is when the child sorts carefully with pointed fingers, accurately and quietly. So these markers are then used to rate children's skills. And we used this task in a piloting study with about 150 children for the validation. And also this is the factorial validity of the basis. What we see is that we have like the intrapersonal domain, so the task performance and the emotional control. They are correlated, but what we strongly have that the blue ones are even more strongly correlated among each other, so they really measure the time dimension. So the factorial validity of the instrument was partly proved. So we use this measure to assess children's development, so over time, but also we then assess individual differences. And we see really from the beginning really large differences between the children. And the question then emerges, okay, if we see this large heterogeneity of social emotional competences in children already at age 4 or even before that, where do these differences come from? And we know from a lot of research that we have factors they lay on the hand of the on part of the child, other factors there come from part of the environment. So child is like age-correlated changes. We know partly it's maturation, but also experience that is responsible for the growth in skills. But also we have biological dispositions such as neurological, genetic, or dispositions or temperament. But also the environment is really important for these differences. So family, daycare, school experience, or the peer group. Those are like the factors that are usually found to be relevant if we want to explain differences in children's social emotional competence. This had led then to really large studies investigating how can we promote, how can we train children's social emotional skills. And there are tons of intervention studies out there, and we can say training interventions are effective. So we really can train social emotional competences, especially in school. So they work. But as I work in early childhood education, so children usually younger than kindergarten age, so 3-year-olds, we then said, okay, maybe that's not appropriate. That's not the appropriate way if we have our education goals in mind. It's not teaching. That's not what we are wanting. And we set out to investigate whether we can support or promote children's social emotional competence through play. And we chose the play form of social pretend play because when it's social pretend play, it's really a a great learning context. You have the social behavior. So you are training in playing social behavior. Also, your mental processes are active because the pretend is really on the mind. Okay, you think, okay, what are others doing and what is this object and how can I use this object? And also peer relationships, because social pretend play, you have to do it in a group. So we said, okay, that's the perfect play form. We want to investigate whether it's really positive for children's social emotional development. We did then a study, an intervention study. It's the relevant, because it's a wordplay. It's how relevant is Fantasiespiel. It's the relevant study. And so it was an intervention design. So we had 3 different groups. So we had an intervention group and a control group and a material group. The material group is like in between a little bit. And we randomly selected this group, so it was really a randomized controlled design. We had pre-tests, we had post-tests and a follow-up, and children participated in the intervention, in the play tutoring intervention during 6 weeks, and also the material and the treatment as usual. We always filmed them, what they did in the intervention. So children in the intervention group, we played with them. So my research assistants, they went into the play groups, they played with them, they played firefighter. Let's play firefighter was the topic. And it was a child-centered, but it was also high active involvement. So the tutors, they use modeling, they use prompting, they are giving ideas, and they are really together with the children in the play. The material-only group, they also had 6 sessions, but the research assistant did not play with them. These children just were given the material. So the same material as the group with the play tutoring. And then we had the treatment as usual group. So there was just the normal play group that were then filmed, and we were looking, okay, what is the educator doing and what are the children doing? And this was the design, and what we wanted to ask here, or what we investigated here, was the idea. So the first idea was, okay, we want to see whether pretend play quality is like the leading mechanisms that improve social emotional development. So it's not that just that children play in social pretend, but that they have a high quality. High quality means that they show a mature play. And first we had to answer the question, it's a bit high here, whether our experimental groups, so the play tutoring, the material only, and the treatment as usual, whether we really could manipulate this social pretend play quality. And in fact we could. So we saw that children who were in the play tutoring group showed the highest level of pretend play quality. The material group was in between, and the treatment as usual was the lowest. And what was interesting from an education perspective, in the material only, we saw that the educators of the group, so not the research assistants, but that the educators started to do active play support. So it was like they took over a little bit the role of the research assistants, even if they were not trained, or so we didn't say them what they should do, but it was really the play support that increased this pretend play quality and not the material. So first we had the manipulation check. Yes, pretend play quality is increasing, or there are differences between these groups. And then we measured children's social, cognitive skills, and also their social and skills and peer relations. And we saw that at the follow-up, children in the play tutoring group had the highest level of social skills, the best peer relations, and also so different social skills indicators. So in general, they showed the most positive changes compared to the material and the treatment as usual group. But it was only when we used educator reports. So we did ask the educators whether they, what is the skill level of the children. We also tested the children, so we measured emotion understanding and theory of mind, and here we could not show any intervention effects. So it's like mixed. Okay, but in a third paper, we then analyzed whether this pretend play quality is really the mechanism, because this is something that is usually like criticized in this kind of studies, because they say, okay, it's just the training, it's just the additional support that the children get through the play tutoring. It's nothing about play. And we really said, okay, we want to see whether it's really the mechanism of change. And we found that at least for some of the competences, for example, for cooperative behavior, pretend play quality was the mechanisms of change, but for other skills, not. And then the last question was, what about children who do not speak the local language? I mean, we have a lot of non-German speaking children in those play groups, and we then looked, okay, does the intervention work for them, and what is the effect for them? And the findings were really interesting. So we saw that children who cannot speak German or German is not their normal language, they profit the same from the active play tutoring. So it's really worked for them. And the most astonishing finding was that they even profited more than other children when we look at the peer relation quality. Because not speaking the local language is one of the risk factors for bad peer relations quality. And through this active play tutoring and playing together with other kids in this social pretend play activity, increased their peer relations. So this was like good news, and we say that promoting social pretend play is especially a good promotive activity for children with low local language competence. Then let's come to the third question, because one of the findings, or what I just told you, that this effect of the pretend play or the play tutoring was not always, the mechanism was not always the social pretend play quality. And we were then thinking, but why did we nevertheless have the positive effect if it's not the pretend play quality? And we were thinking that mainly, probably it has to do that through this active play tutoring, children learned to play together. Because, I mean, they are 3 and 4 years old, so a lot of them only just do parallel play. That they learned it, and that probably the peer context is very important for these improvements that we have seen. So what children, their relationship, that started through the play. And so then the peer relations, and this is was my PhD a long time ago, where we really have seen that having good peer relations with others is very important for children, really also at a very young age. And because positive peer relations is good for your belongingness, for your well-being. But if you have experienced negative peer relations, such as exclusion or victimization, you are at risk for depressive symptoms. These were findings that have been replicated hundreds of times, especially in school children. But also if we look at younger ages, so this is like a finding from 2 and 4 year olds, we already see here the positive, so that positive peer relations predict children's well-being in daycare. So already in that young age, the quality of peer relations is important. The quality of peer relations is also important when we think about, okay, how do children acquire social-emotional competences? And we can observe, so for children who have deficits in their social-emotional competence, we can see some kind of negative downward spiral. So if they have deficits in social emotional competences, for example, if they are withdrawn or cannot set limits or so on, they are at risk for negative or few peer interactions. So thus they have, again, fewer learning opportunities. And this can then lead, for example, their experience of having negative peer interactions. We know it's a predictor for depressive symptoms, but it's also a predictor for aggressive behavior, because they start like revenging themselves, or how they cope with this negative experience. So they might start to show emotional and behavioral problems, which is then again related to low social emotional competences. So we really have to be aware within children how competences and peer relations, how they interact. And we can use it in a positive way, but what we see that it also happens in the negative way, that there is a potential downward spiral for children with problems. And the second idea, or the second fact, that why are peer relations important? So one is really the well-being, but one is also that peer group is a learning context. So within peer relations, you can train your social emotional competences. You can apply them, so you have to apply them because you need them to function in a group. And we know that children or people learn from each other, so modeling is very important at that age. And it's important, it's for better and for worse. So you can learn positive things, but you can also learn negative things from your peers. And this is where we started our one of our newer research studies. It's the EMU study. It's about emotions and emotion regulation, and we are investigating the peer influence on emotion regulation. As I said before, emotion regulation is really one of the well-known risk factors for a bad development, for a non-optimal development. And we are investigating what is the role of the peer group. Again, we have children 3 and 4 year olds, so really young ones. And what we have seen in one paper of a collaborator of mine, she showed that the empathic co-regulation that the friends show, not the other peers, but my friends, this is predictive for a child's development of emotion regulation. So if your friends have a high level of empathic co-regulation, so if they comfort you or share with you, then this predicts your positive development. In another part of this study, we observed children. Again, we observed them in play. You see, we like observations. Observations in play. So children were assigned in diets, in different diets. So they played different times with different partners. And they were asked to play with these balancing blocks. And they will fall, so they are not stable enough, so at the end they will fall down. And they were asked to build a large tower or a house for the mouse. There was also a mouse in the set, and they were always playing together at twos. And we were looking then what is the emotion regulation that the children show, what can we observe, and how is an individual child's emotion regulation associated with the emotion regulation of his or her partner. We did this with the social relations model, and we have seen that, in fact, there is some effect on the diet, so it matters with whom you play for your own emotion regulation. So the effect was not as large as we thought, but there was a small effect. And then in a follow-up study, it's more a qualitative approach. We were looking about, okay, how does it work, this peer influence? What happens there? And we had a second task there where also the same diets played. It was about with the hexbugs. Maybe you know them. They are robotic beetles, and they're making you very, very nervous. So it's really it really initiates high excitement also among adults. I don't like them, but children like them and they are really excited. And they were asked to play with this board with the beetles. So there were several beetles that they have. And they had the task that they should look that the beetles can go to eat the cake. And these beetles, they are moving really randomly. They are just moving around. And some of them will drop off the board, and then you have to get them back. They will disappear under the cupboard or whatever. So it really initiates a lot of excitement with the children, but also some potential frustration. And we observed the children during this task, and an ongoing qualitative study now looks at really at certain diets. Okay, how are the mechanisms of this peer influence for emotion regulation? And we did see really nice examples for imitation. So there was one couple, it was really one child, really she was so excited, she just jumped. And the other one started again. So they were really, over the whole play session, they were just, one is jumping, then the other one, and so on. Really, that this imitation was really one of the mechanisms. And the other one was also funny. It was really direct influence. There was one diet where one of the children always said to the other one, so one child was very excited and having fun and enjoying this task. The other one was rather calm and yeah, it's okay, it's not so funny. And the other one always, okay, yes, it's fun. Look, it's really fun. It was really like, okay, please show now that you also are enjoying this task. And it worked at the end. So, and this is ongoing work where we really want to see, okay, how does it work? Really to get more into this, what are the mechanisms of influence? So, and now I just want to have a short outlook in our newest study, and this is with our nice colleague here from the PH Zürich, Christian Hermann, but also Laura Dapp from the Uni Konstanz, my doctoral student, Jonathan Windkes, who is here, but also with Katrin Kress, Katrin Breitz, Johanna Kress, Ilaria Ferrari, and Angelo. I don't know his last name. So they are all a little bit or very strongly involved in this project. It's the Mosaic study. And in this study, we want to investigate how this domain of motor competences interplays with the domain of social-emotional competences. We are working with the Zurich longitudinal study, so we are starting in when children are age 5, and we will test them for 3 years. So we will test them for their motor competences, but also for their social-emotional competences with this behavioral assessment of social-emotional skills I presented you earlier. And we also assess their self-perceived competence or self-concept, more broadly speaking, and also their well-being. And we want to follow this developmental path and how this interplays over time. So we are really excited about this study now. We have the first data assessment, so the first cohort data assessment is finished. And you might see we have later 2 posters of my colleagues who already show some of the results or at least preliminary insights of this study. So if you are interested, you can look at the posters, and otherwise I'm certain you will hear more about this study in the next few years. So let's come to my conclusion. Move and Learn was the title, and when we come back to this, our 2 girls here, we can summarize social emotional development begins in early childhood. So it's something that we can really observe early on, but it stops not there. So it goes through all of the childhood, through adolescence, and even in adulthood, you still can learn to being socially competent. For example, as a more introverted person, you can learn to stand before an audience and to give a talk, even if it's not your original interest. What is also good to know, social competence can be measured with behavioral measures. I think this is really an advancement and a potential for future studies, and we are really willing to share also this instrument if you want to use it in your own research. We have also seen that play can support children's social emotional development. So play should be not only in early childhood, but we also think that in schools that play just belongs to childhood and that it's just a great learning environment. And this also leads then to the to-dos. I think we should provide diverse opportunities for play and physical activities also. So this is like the role of the adults. So in school, out of school, at home, in the community. So the children have the freedom to play and to play with their friends and to move around. If we plan and design, or especially, for example, if you are in sports education, if you are planning sports or play activities, always keep in mind the social emotional skills, because some of the tasks you do will challenge some skills more than others. For example, cooperative play might be more supportive to learning to be cooperative. If you have more competitive games or activities, this might be a challenge or a learning ground for emotion regulation. Because if you learn to lose, or how do you deal with frustration, it's really important. But here, children need scaffolding, so children need adults that support them in their development, not just to say, okay, it's not bad. No, it is bad, but you have to learn to control your feelings. And lastly, I would like to point out that be aware of peer group dynamics. This is something that we often forget, because almost all sports, play, or physical activities are together with other peers. And if we have a peer group, situations of exclusion and inclusion, rejection, victimization, and so happen. And children need adult support also to deal with these situations. So peer group dynamics is really something that sometimes goes forgotten, and also the positive and the negative effects, potential effects of the peer groups are important, I think. So I hope I gave you some insight in our research on social emotional development, and if you have questions, I am happy to answer it.